Hi guys, welcome back to the Astral Imaging channel. We do not have a presenter for tonight, so we're going to have another one of our open sessions. And of course, our open sessions rely on you guys typing in your questions or making comments or bringing up small topics you'd like to discuss. So feel free to type in your comments and all of that. It's a good time to show you where you can do that. I'm going to try and do this semi-regularly. So let me share my screen. Actually, I'm going to share it in a particular way. You're looking at the Astro Imaging channel site, and as I remember this is last week's image of the week. I did not post one this week. I guess I just kind of forgot, but we will have one next week. Sorry about that. And I even pulled up the screen. Wow. But the way to comment on the Astro Imaging channel is to go to our homepage. Had to quickly jump down there and mute that. Otherwise, I get the terrible echo. Our homepage here, theastroimagingchannel.com, will get you there. This bouncy box, click it, and that's our chat. If you'd like to, you can click that button right there and pop it out, and then you can make it small or whatever size you'd like and put it next to the video as you watch it. That is basically how you take part in these conversations. Anything else I want to show you while I'm here? No, well, might as well show you. We try and keep upcoming shows listed here and past shows. If you want to see any of our past shows, you can click there. Of course, check out our images of the week or contact me. Support us if you want an Astro Imaging channel t-shirt. Feel free to click it. Let me see. Forget. It's $30 domestic for an Astro Imaging channel t-shirt. I do have a bunch of them in stock. I think I have everything but small right now. Okay. Got to mute it again. That is it for that. Taking my window back. There we go. So, we started out the Astro Imaging channel basically it was basically focused on processing and sharing various processing techniques. But as much as we'd like to do processing all day long, we've kind of covered a lot of that stuff. And rather than repeating the same things over and over and over again, we kind of migrated and we try and cover a lot of different topics. And of course, we are always reaching out for presenters, and we got a great one a couple weeks ago. Molly had presented basically on her trials and tribulations in her first year, 2 years of astro imaging. And it's funny because as I was watching the comments, everyone was saying the same things. We all kind of went through the same routine of learning. But stepping even further back, what was it that got you into astrophotography? I was not necessarily an astronomer before I got into astrophotography. Like everyone else, I'm sure, I watched the shows on TV. I watched the Cosmos. I even read books on physics. But one of the things that when I realized that I wasn't really good enough at math to do the physics and understand the heavy physics that went on with that stuff, I thought, well, you know what I can do? I can grab a telescope, look up at the sky and appreciate the beauty of it. So I think that was my way to kind of take part in what was somewhat science, but also just kind of with astrophotography, a form of art. I'm terrible at drawing. I'm terrible at painting. I'm even pretty bad with portraits, just with a DSLR camera. But for some reason, framing an astrophoto or doing something that involves a long technical process, that's the way that I get to demonstrate my artistic sense. So I've told this story before. I'll tell it again because well, that's what we have to do. Um, what actually got me into astronomy and astrophotography, I shouldn't say astronomy, because even without picking up a telescope, you can be into astronomy, right? You can read books, you can look at pictures, you can read on the internet, you kind of try and understand and take an interest in it. But what got me to buy a telescope, I was actually in West Virginia in really dark skies, and I looked up and I could swear that I was looking at a galaxy. And I I doubted myself. I'll admit I had a few drinks at the time, so there was enough in me to have a lot of doubt. But ooh, and I apologize for my dogs. But I could swear, and I'm talking to myself, and I'm saying, you know, I could swear it's up there. I'm not just seeing this. It looks like just a star cloud, but it's all galaxy-like, and it looks like a tight. So, long story short, I'm not even sure if I was looking at the Andromeda Galaxy. Although I'm at this point, I'm pretty confident that I think that it was, because it was bigger than I was expecting. It was, as I say, a few moons across. I probably saw 3 or 4 moons across. So I was thinking about it. We were out camping, and I was thinking about it. And on the way home, I was trying to talk myself into buying a telescope. And I basically said to my wife, I'm going to buy a telescope when we get home. That was pretty impressive. Even if it wasn't a galaxy, that was pretty darn impressive, the skies down there. So we got home, and I started Googling it, trying to make my decision on which telescope to buy. And I think at that point, somebody said to me, well, these are good telescopes, but let me ask you this. Does photography interest you at all? And when they said that, it kind of clicked. And I thought to myself, well, what kind of results could I get? And I started searching for, I'm trying to think of the keywords I used. Astrophotography for home, photographing galaxies, that type of thing. Because my preconceived notion at the time was that to photograph a galaxy or a nebula, you need a professional telescope, right? That's what these professional observatories are doing, these 30-foot domes that the universities own. And I didn't realize really how much could be done with just a DSLR camera, a small refractor, and a nice, a relatively inexpensive mount. It's not just these professional observatories. When I searched, some of the best photos that I was looking at, of course, short of the Hubble, but some of the best photos I was looking at were just people shooting from their driveway. I quickly found Cloudy Nights, because Cloudy Nights internet forums, because the people in there, well, they really knew what they were doing. I mean, you go into the CCD forum, and basically everything they post in there is a masterpiece. And I quickly realized how driven by the amateur, I don't want to say driven by the amateur market, but pretty pictures is the amateur's job. A lot of the big observatories are doing science, and they have, because of the weather, because they're always trying to take advantage of what little time they have, and trying to get as much science and data like that in, a lot of professional observatories don't really do pretty pictures. So when I pull up a pretty picture, a pretty astrophotograph on my computer, it's probably an amateur. If it's not one of the few kind of awe-inspiring photos that the Hubble will put out. And, you know, they put those out, that's not what they do. They put those out to get people's interest. Because if they put out a, I don't know if they put out a plot of the various spectra of stars that they've detected, you know, the astronomers will go, oh, pretty cool, but that's not what grabs the masses' attention. People that aren't into astronomy look at a Hubble image and are just amazed. That gets people into astronomy. And under the same kind of, under the same thinking, I look at my astrophotography as my own form of outreach. I can take my telescope out to a state park, set up, and people will want to look through it. But I can also take my photos basically anywhere I want. I can have them on my cell phone. I can post them on forums, on Facebook, share them with friends. And some people say, yeah, pretty cool, okay. Then some people start asking questions. And when they start asking questions, that's where I really just like to, I don't know, it makes for a great conversation. So I've been talking for about 10 minutes here. Anyone else here want to share any stories like that? What got you into astrophotography? Any interesting stories? I'm going to try and take a second to just read the chat, even though I see there hasn't been that much. But if anyone's interested, please go right ahead.
Yeah, I was a science geek, you know, just read science websites, but I never was into actual astronomy. But, you know, same as you know, I used to watch shows like Cosmos and things like that. And one day I bought a telescope, a little one, but then, you know, it's kind of, you're by yourself, and I wanted to share it. Like, you're looking around, hey, come look at this, but there's nobody around. And well, what's the best way to share it except taking a picture of it? So that's basically it.
Yep. And then when you do hear, or you put a little research into deep sky astrophotography, and you find out that you can see more when you take a picture of it, as long as you take a longer exposure, and then you can see colors. You know, they say don't expect to see the galaxy like the picture on the box of the telescope. So I want to know how you take that picture that's on the box of the telescope, because that's amazing. And that's what got it in. Alex, I saw your mic.
Yeah, I really heard your part about lack of confidence in your artistic talent as far as drawing, sketching, or anything else like that, because that certainly describes me. I really have absolutely no talent as far as sketching or anything else like that. As many of you know who follow us regularly, I do a lot of visual observing, and as part of my visual observing, I sketch each of the objects that I find, and they're really ugly, but they really do teach you a lot to sketch them and stuff like that. But the camera can take over a lot of those things that I don't have in me. However, my lack of artistic ability also shows up in my astroimaging, because there are things that I simply cannot see in an astrophoto. When I'm listening to somebody talk about processing and they say, okay, see, there's too much green here. And I go, nope, I just don't see that. I just don't see what you mean by too much green. Now, if I apply, you know, the SCNR and remove the green, well, I can see that there is a bit of a difference, but it just doesn't occur to me that there is something there. It's one of the reasons why I'll never really be a really good imager, is because I simply cannot. I don't have the artistic. I don't have the artistic ability to see that kind of stuff. It's just harder to do than I can do. That's not one of my talents. But I think there's also a great attraction in this hobby for the geekiness, you know, the attachment to levers and knobs and wheels and software and stuff like that. I mean, I know guys that spend all night getting a T-point model and never get around to taking their images. So I think that's another thing that attracts us to this hobby. And I'll shut up and let other people go for a while.
that is funny because definitely gearheads are attracted to the hobby.
Yeah, the challenge of it is a big attraction.
Is it astrophotography in particular? Is it that the challenge is the attraction, the technical challenge is the attraction, or is it just that if you buy a telescope and you don't intended for astrophotography and you don't have that technical ability, you're just never going to use it? I mean, I remember my first telescope as a young child. I was like, I don't know, I was probably 5 or 6 or something, and my father bought me a telescope, and I was into science at the time, so it was really cool. Set it up the first night, but got it working to look at the moon once, and then, you know, the second night we went out, I remember not being able to figure out which eyepiece is, what was a Barlow, what was this and what was that. And being 5 or 6, I needed to rely on someone else's technical ability. And my father, I am sure he would admit, doesn't have much. And so for that reason, I probably didn't look through another telescope until I was 30 some years old. I wanted to. I just I even remember probably when I was 16 or 17 trying to get it back together, and I just didn't know what I didn't have, and it was eyepieces. Without an eyepiece, you're not going to go very far.
Adam, I have a couple of thoughts. Actually, the story that Molly told a couple of weeks ago is not all that different than all of us. We all started out, you know, looking at crummy images and thinking they were wonderful, and improving it as we see that other people were getting much finer images. But the one thing that has really struck me in developing whatever astrophotography I do is that both my parents were artists. They were accomplished artists and craftspeople. I couldn't draw a circle. I couldn't draw a cartoon. I came in last in the poster contest in high school for the Forest Festival. I was terrible. But somehow at the age of 70, I discovered this, and all of a sudden, whatever those dormant genes were that my parents passed down to me have come out in this. And so this is my art. Unfortunately, they're not around to thank them, but I think it kind of gives me a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling that all of a sudden I have an art. Mm-hmm. Even though my hands can't draw anything, my computer can.
Yeah. Yeah, for a lot of us, I think it just kind of fits.
I have a comment to make about what Alex talked about, seeing green on screen, which I had a conversation with a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago, which is very interesting. And listen to this. He was seeing astigmatism on a screen, and he's chasing his tail trying to correct the telescope. It turned out it was his eye. He was seeing, and if he turned his head 90 degrees on the screen, the astigmatism went away. That's very interesting. Alex said that, you know, what we're seeing on the screen. It was just a little side note. I didn't want to derail the conversation, but.
That was an example of a generalized thing. There's lots of other things I just don't see. I don't know if you know about the research about visual acuity and stuff like that, but women, for instance, can see tons more colors than men. And so when women are looking at something, they can simply see things that men cannot see. And they can put a name on it and things like that. But the men, I mean, it's a much larger subset of colors than men can. Well, I'm all the way back even beyond that. I can't even see some of these things, you know. Remember the program we had probably in our first year about what makes a good astro image? There are people who can look at an astro image and they can say, hey, that's really good and stuff like that, and they can start expressing it. But it's only until they start expressing that I can actually see what they are talking about. And I can't always see what they're talking about. You know, I know that they got the feeling, but it's not, I can't see it. I just can't see it. So.
Well, you know, it's funny because sometimes when you're processing an astrophotograph, you just don't know whether it's good or not. And I don't know if you've, I'm going to assume all you have experienced this, but you process an astrophotograph and you literally can't tell whether it's good or terrible, right? Is that such a good processing job that it looks great, or is that such a bad processing job? And you do it again, right? You process it from scratch all over again, and you decide which one you like. It's funny how sometimes you could just be blinded by staring at the screen. I remember when I first started out, my goal in processing astrophotographs was to not have the stars look like black and white dots on, look like white dots on black, right? There had to be some realness to it. It was really easy to totally blow out the stars and then make the background completely black, lose a lot of detail in the process, but then nothing looked natural. So I don't quite know what it is. I had always had difficulty where if I spent 15, 20 minutes working on a photograph, I literally just had to walk away and come back and look at it because I couldn't tell. Like I couldn't tell whether it was getting good or whether it was falling apart.
The thing to remember about astrophotography is that it is an art form, and when it's what it looks like is up to the person who makes it. And like when you go to an art gallery and you see some art that's ostensibly very good and famous or whatever, you can look at that and go like, I think that kind of sucks, you know? Or when you see a work of art just by some random person, you're like, hey, that's really good, but somebody else might disagree. So you have to remember that it is an art form, and that whatever you want to make it is what it is. I know somebody who tends to like to really oversaturate their images. They look really a lot more like kind of a cool art piece, I guess, where I like to make mine as realistic as possible. But they both have good things about them, and it's sort of whatever you want to make it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. You know, when do you come to the image that makes it complete? And the answer is I never know, and I don't think any of us really know. You just keep working on it and working on it and working on it, and all of a sudden you say, okay, that's what I want, whatever that might be. But it's a linear process for the first half, and then the last half is we're going to keep plugging away, and eventually you have your 16 or 20 layers, and you say, that's what I want. The interesting part about that is about 3 years ago, I did an image of the Butterfly Nebula. And I thought, oh, in the last 3 years, I've learned something. So I'm going to go back and look at that data because I can do better. I spent a couple hours on it, and it never came out as good as what I did 3 years ago. And I have no idea why. So teaching us how to get good images in astrophotography, I don't know really how to do that other than teach people processes, and hopefully they get to an endpoint where they enjoy what they have in front of them.
I think the other thing with astrophotography or a particular astrophotograph, I will go into a photograph with a vision of how I want it to look. And right after the framing, that vision will completely fall apart, and the image will just kind of, as I process it, it'll fall towards what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, have you ever achieved that? But you
no, right? You have that idea as how you want it to look, but when you process it, you say, well, no, that's not going to work. But no, this is working. This is working. It's almost like painting an abstract picture, except you don't really get to choose the colors and where the stuff goes, right? But I don't know. It's fun. So I see. One of our viewers was inspired by his 4th grade science teacher, and he's had a 4.5-inch Tasco reflector forever. 2010, he hooked up a Starshoot imager to his 12-inch Dob, and he was hooked, right? So I'm assuming that was for planetary. My first The first thing I did when I got my telescope was it was Saturn, and I was blown away. I just I remember, like, I say it, I was jumping up and down, but I was literally jumping up and down while looking through the eyepiece. Don't know, don't ask me how I was doing that, but if it's for you, you know it's for you.
Adam, got a question.
Sure.
You made the comment that when you start, you have an idea what that picture is supposed to look like. Where did you get the idea of what it should look like?
Well, okay, so I look at other people's images.
Okay.
Yeah, people say things like, I try and make it look like it's going to look in nature. Well, in nature, these objects are very diffuse, and that's why we're taking really long exposures, because we're taking something that's very, very dim and trying to make it brighter. But yeah, it's basically by other photos, and a lot of times what I really think gives us the most opportunity for the artistic choices that we make is really the framing, because like I said, everything else falls into place. But if you can find a really interesting region, particularly with long focal length astrophotography, and especially with long focal length narrowband, if you can find a really interesting region within a nebula and just kind of take that as the focal point, or try and work as much detail out of that, that's what I think really interests me and gives you that opportunity to come up with, you know, I said like an abstract piece of art, but in a sense, I really do look at a lot of my astrophotographs as somewhat abstract. You know, the gas is how do I say it? It's just floating up there, right? It's not in it, we're going to recognize the patterns coming out of it, right? It's not that there's, so I look at that as somewhat abstract, and I'm just trying to make it look visually pleasing, while also looking natural. What's natural? Well, I want people to look at it and say, well, that's a photo of space, but wow, look at that, those flowing clouds. That's pretty impressive.
So what you were saying earlier too, with having the fact that images are inspiring, and like with the Hubble images and stuff, that's the kind of stuff that got me into physics in the first place. And I was really interested in cosmology and stuff before I ever really paid much attention to the night sky itself, which is what drew me to major in physics. To the point where, you know, the Hubble ultra deep fields, where it's just that very small patch of sky with the very deep, weeks-long image showing galaxies that are billions of light years away. I'll go look at one of those. I need like just a little extra oomph to get my homework done, and because that's a tool that can be used to draw people into either into this hobby or into science, or really just to be paying attention to science at all, are these images. And I think people like you can go online and get some really neat Hubble images and stuff any day of the week, but knowing that somebody that you know personally is taking these images with like ground-based equipment really kind of adds that extra dimension to it. And I've gotten a lot of good response when I describe how I took the image, what kind of camera I used and stuff, as well as what the thing is. People really like to see that in addition to just, okay, we have this really cool space picture. So that's like a really important reason to do astrophotography in the first place, is for that sharing component of bringing other people in, just to say, hey, you know, there's this thing called the universe, and it's got this really awesome stuff in it, and we can actually observe things in it from our little home here. And that's kind of like a bottom line for science, is the things that we can do with really not too complicated equipment a lot of the time, at least these days.
Yep. And I see George is making a similar comment. Attended a talk on the Big Bang Theory that seemed like it went on for a few minutes, but it was over an hour and a half long. And that's actually bringing up a memory I had when I was, oh, I don't know how old I was. I was very young, but I was chatting with my cousin at my lake house. I used to have great chats with my cousin, and for some reason, the book is still there at my lake house. She was reading A Brief History of Time. So I don't know when that book came out, but it was probably around that time. Must have been the maybe early 90s, maybe late 80s. But we were discussing, not knowing anything about physics, of course. We were discussing just the basics of this and how complex it was. I remember that is probably the most interesting conversation that I've had, or the most memorable conversation that I've had in my youth. And it drove me to just always take an interest in science or physics or anything like that. And even throughout grade school, I loved science. Unfortunately, my high school wasn't that great in the science department, and that's kind of where it fell apart for me. I wish it hadn't, but maybe I'm glad it did, because now I get to appreciate science as a hobby and not an occupation. Because if you're doing it as an occupation, sometimes it's not so fun. Sometimes.
Part of what you were saying before with the technical challenge as well, for me, and I think for a lot of people who are interested in, who like to get their hands on things and consider themselves geeky, I guess, or just sort of this crowd of people. It's the technical challenge in it that makes it exciting. Like, as much as sharing the images and seeing the final result, also knowing all the hard work you had to put into it is part of the joy, because you derive such satisfaction from doing something that is really hard and takes a lot of time and takes a lot of your mental effort and sleepless nights. And that's part of the joy of it as well, of seeing those beautiful results, is knowing how much work went into it. And that's sort of can be a motivator for a lot of people as well to get into it.
Yeah, it's exactly right. You're very much right, because like you said, you could just go download the image from somewhere else and print it and hang it on your wall, but you're not going to get the satisfaction out of it. You do it yourself, and then you keep working on it and get better and better at it, and your images improve, which makes it even more addictive, because you know that if you keep working at it, you're going to get even better, and becomes an addiction.
There's a specific type of person where if you tell him he can't do something, or if you tell him something's really, really difficult, he's going to find a way to do it. And I know I'm one of those people. Why you don't have to do it, just download the photo, then you got it. Yeah, but that's not a challenge. I might as well do it from scratch. Talk about Comet Hale-Bopp inspired a lot of people into getting into astronomy. It's funny because we're in a hobby where there's going to be certain natural phenomena that are going to be the best publicity that we could possibly get.
Our club membership swelled, I think, by 40 or 50 members last year for the solar eclipse.
Yep. Comets are great because when they work out, you never know if they're going to work out. Would someone comment on their favorite objects, DSOs versus wide field? DSOs versus wide field. Well, I think if you ask about our favorite objects, you're going to get basically the list of like those beginner objects. I'd say Orion Nebula, can't beat it. Andromeda Galaxy, M13, Hercules, Hercules cluster. Basically M51, Whirlpool Galaxy. If I were to give you my favorite objects, it'd basically be a list of probably the top 10 objects with a few extras added in. My personal favorite is probably the Iris Nebula. But when you say DSOs versus wide field, I don't know if you're asking whether I prefer long focal length versus wide field. And in that case, I would probably just say it depends on the target. But I think that's how I'm going to answer that question unless I get further.
Like M57 and Crescent would be good targets for long focal length, right?
Yep. Yeah, M57, the Ring Nebula, any planetary nebula for long focal length. The Owl Nebula, what's that, M97? Do I have that right?
97. And I've gotten one of my favorite Crescent images is actually at a far shorter focal length of about 500 millimeters. Was my favorite Crescent Nebula image. I was able to get much more of the detail in the center and even a lot of the kind of outer, the nebulosity in the rest of the image than I was ever able to do with my F10 Schmidt-Cassegrain.
Yeah. Yeah, probably the speed of the refractor just allow
massive difference.
Yeah, it just brings all that signal up off the noise. Makes
yeah,
a huge.
You could pretty much blindly point at Cygnus and you're gonna get something.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, there are probably three targets which really stand out for me. The Rosette, which is an emission nebula, and you can do that in narrow band. You can do that in RGB or some combination. The Heart and Soul, again, wide field, or there's probably a dozen smaller targets in there that you can focus in on, put them all together. Let's see, a Heart and Soul, Rosette. Those are probably my favorites. You can never go wrong with those. They're always going to give you a decent image. They're fairly bright. Whether you have dark skies or light polluted skies, you can shoot them quite nicely.
I hear Linda's comment, or I see Linda's comment here. And she saw M31 through a telescope and remembers being a bit disappointed, nothing like the pictures she'd seen. But what really impressed her was seeing the smudge of Andromeda naked eye, because you can just look up and see it. It's right there in the sky. Yeah, and I remember staring and staring and staring and saying, but there's something there, and it's not a cloud. And I remember it.
The Andromeda Galaxy is a surprisingly difficult target to image. I mistakenly tried to shoot it with my 8-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain back in the first year I was trying to do this, and that didn't really work out so well. But even with the refractor, I've done probably 14 attempts on it, I think, so far, and still haven't gotten an image that I'm really in love with on it yet. But I would still put that up on my list of favorite targets just because it's so challenging of a target, but like it's so bright, you would expect it to be so easy to image, and it's been one of the hardest things for me to get a satisfactory image of so far.
Yeah, I concur with that. I must have shot it 10 times before that last time, which I'm really happy with, so much so that I'm content with not shooting it again for a while. But that last time, I think from really dark skies, I think I had 18 hours on the RGB, and then I shot H alpha to just pull out some of the H alpha regions within it. And the RGB image was impressive on its own. When I put the H alpha into it, it just popped. And I was even able to pull some detail out of those H alpha regions that, I mean, it was like having little teeny nebula clouds in my Andromeda Galaxy. It was pretty cool. That's one of...
Was your last image of the, if I can remember right, wasn't that a little crop with your 8-inch? or with your RC? Didn't you do a crop?
Oh, that was more. Yeah, that would have been more recent than it. I did that of the. What was that? That is like. It looks like a Pleiades in Andromeda, but it's actually. I think it's actually either an H alpha region.
Like there's these dust lanes and everything.
You see the dust lanes, but you also see what I believe are individual stars within Andromeda.
Well, my last Andromeda was actually, I was inspired by your image, and I went with the same philosophy, but I did an 8-panel mosaic with a long focal length telescope, which was it was a really challenge. I mean, it was really hard to do. But
Yeah.
I've done wide field where it went easier. But I wanted to ask Molly what her challenge was. What did she think that was hard to do on Andromeda?
Well, at first it was so again using the Schmidt category. Now it's getting just kind of the middle of it. It was still pretty much just looked like a fuzzy thing. I could see some of the dust lane detail. And then when I imaged it with when I started imaging it with my Orion short tube, which was my guide scope last year, probably the hardest part of it for me so far has been color balance. I finally got one last year where I kind of really played around with like the curves for each of the red, green, and blue channels, which felt kind of fake to me, but I managed to get a color balance that I thought looked nice and sort of matched other things I was seeing online. But it usually turns out just with super weird colors, even though I can get good colors on a lot of my other images. So that was always been kind of perplexing. And then just in a lot of other people's images of the Andromeda Galaxy, you really get the sense of 3D-ness on the galaxy itself, and it looks like you can see the top and kind of it wrapping around to the bottom. I've never really been able to achieve that. Let me throw up a picture here of my most recent favorite attempt. Do a quick screen share here. I'll drag this over here. Yeah, so this is my favorite attempt so far. Actually, let me turn down I have a color screen reddener. There we go. But it still doesn't quite have kind of the detail along the edges and quite the color balance that I'm going for. I think I might just still need longer exposures yet, but do like short exposures and long exposures together to get that high dynamic range. So I'm gonna keep working on this one, but getting there. But yeah, it seems to be a real challenge for me.
What are the lengths of these exposures?
Okay, let me go pull it up real quick, because I used to have this all memorized. I used to be able to look at a picture and go, oh yeah, that was this many images and this long of exposure time. But it's I'm taking so many now, I can't quite remember anymore. So I'm pull up my documentation file. Oops, sorry, switch screens here. Yeah, so. I haven't gotten a whole lot of exposure on it. Is probably my main issue. It looks like this last one was only 18 minutes total at ISO 1600. So that's part of the challenge as well, is getting enough exposure time on it in good parts of the year with the telescope with a short enough focal length. But that'll be my a goal of mine for this fall if I get enough good weather.
Yeah, the data itself is pretty good. There'll actually be more data in the center core there. That appears to be blown out, but probably isn't. But the difficulty is, did you say you use Photoshop or no?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so obviously the difficulty is masking the interior while you're stretching the exterior and trying to reveal that while not blowing out the center.
Yeah, I had some good success using a technique that I saw on YouTube. I can't remember exactly. Oh, who was it? I have to go look at the link again. But on the Orion Nebula, showing how to take like short exposures and then longer exposures and how to composite the two together. I actually had some really nice success with that, which is this image. Oh shoot, here. Accidentally navigated out of that folder, which was actually just a test image of my new ZWO camera.
I think, if I remember correctly, didn't Josh do a presentation on
Yes.
how to do that on the channel here?
Yes. And he did
I
it
think
on
we
the Orion
have a
Nebula.
show showing how to do that.
Yeah, it turned out to be not too difficult of a procedure, and you could do this with. You can see that we do this with 3 or even 4 depths of exposure. But these are 1 minute long exposures and 5 second long exposures, and you're able to resolve the core and get some nice detail out on the edges. And this is under a full moon too. So and that technique wasn't too difficult to do. So I'm probably going to give that a shot with other targets in the future now that I've kind of tried it out and seen how it goes.
Now, the difference between the Orion and Andromeda is the Orion is so bright in the core that it's going to require those 5 second exposures. Whereas the Andromeda, even with 3 minute exposures, you are going to reveal a lot of the dust within the core. So you're going to do kind of an HDR technique, but with Orion, where you're going to use a 5 second exposure, 180 second exposure, and then maybe an 8 minute exposure. With Andromeda, you almost could get away with that 3 minute exposure to do both that revealing of the core and kind of also pulling out that outer rim.
It might be about time for me to go revisit that one now that I've gotten a little bit better at Deep Sky Stacker and Photoshop, and I will eventually be moving into more advanced software as time and money allow.
Yeah, I'm trying not to tempt you with the tool within PixInsight that basically does that. That basically compresses the dynamic range so that you got this photograph with too much dynamic range, like an Orion or an Andromeda, but you can't see all of it, and it basically compresses it. So it reveals a lot more detail within a nebula. And I'm trying not to tempt you with that, but
now I will be getting PixInsight probably within the year. So well, I gotta start doing a little research on how to use it, and but I had a good book recommended to me on getting started with it. So that's probably gonna happen sometime this year.
Yeah, honestly, now that it's probably Warren's book, because I don't think there are that many books on PixInsight, but honestly, now that the book is out, it's a lot easier to recommend PixInsight to people. It used to be just so complex without anywhere to look. There were a few videos on YouTube to watch, but now the book really gives you a walkthrough. It's basically documentation that PixInsight has always somewhat lacked a little bit. Another David, okay, let me see, Canyonlands, sunset shoot, coming back to his hotel, saw all the stars. I guess he blindly pointed his 17mm lens up, came home, found out he had shot Andromeda Galaxy, and that hooked him. Andromeda, that doesn't take much more than Andromeda to hook you. Sorry, I am scanning down, hopefully as quickly as I can. Yeah,
and that's Dave Rankin is the Rankin Studios is the video I'd watched on that HDR technique with the Orion Nebula.
we all have the same story. It's funny. It's not a question of do you think that's cool? Once you see it, once you see Orion, once you see Saturn, even when you see an astrophotograph and then someone says, well, I took it from my driveway. You're like, you could take that from your driveway? Your driveway right there, you took that from, I've got to try that. It's funny. I see a lot of side conversations. Oh, here's one. Has anyone tried remote observing or renting time on big scopes? We had a presentation on someone who had done just that, rented time on, help me out here.
iTelescope.
iTelescope, yes. And he brought us through the process of choosing your target, choosing your particular telescope, getting your window, because you're actually like getting a window of time. And then you download the data. They have all of the calibration files on there, and you can do it. He had a subscription that made it slightly more reasonable for him, but I do know it is a bit expensive. Now, what's expensive? I'm not going to put a number on it, but we all probably have a whole lot of gear sitting in our garage or in our trunk of our car or something ready to go out that is very expensive. But you know, we have that for life. Anytime we want to use it, we could do it. Try and divide the telescope, the price of the mount over how many times you're going to use it in its lifetime. It's probably still going to be kind of expensive, but in general, I thought it was a bit more expensive than I would have been comfortable paying. Maybe better than that is if you go onto a place like Cloudy Nights, or I know of a few remote observatories will provide free data just so you can try it out. Do you have to be the one that selected the target if you're not necessarily the one that's controlling the telescope? I don't know. I guess that's up to you. But yes, you can rent time on big scopes. I want to say the biggest they had might have been, was it a 24? I think it was a 24. The benefit of it is they're in good skies. It's professional equipment with really good cameras. You're talking systems that you're not going to buy.
I believe iTelescope has a CDK 700.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, so
what does that come out to? About 27, I think 27 inch.
Yeah.
600 is 24, so yeah, I guess 700 would be about 26.
And they have them basically all over the world. So if you want the southern skies, you can shoot the southern skies. If you want the northern skies, you can shoot the northern skies. And if anything breaks, it's not your concern, because they have people maintaining them, and you're not necessarily in control of the pointing. Their software does all the pointing for you and all the acquisition for you. So I can't guarantee that it's going to be the best money you've ever spent, but I can guarantee that you're not going to trip over the power cord and mess it all up. Yeah, a lot of people saying they like PixInsight. I have not used Astro Pixel processor myself. I had seen it demonstrated before. I'm actually going to look into it a bit further. Someone had suggested them, I believe, presenting, so I will look into that. Molly, you should download the PixInsight trial. 45 days. I think it was only 30 when I did it.
Yeah, I
And
saw that.
with the book, it could go a lot quicker. It used to honestly be a mistake to download the trial because 30 days wasn't enough time to understand it, to learn it well enough to actually figure it out. But with the book, you can literally just kind of get the walkthrough. And as confused as I was,
I went through that deciding process of which way to go when I was shopping for a processing software, and what sealed the deal on the PixInsight was the availability of support.
Mhm.
You could pretty much go anywhere and get support for it. So that was the reason why I went that way.
You know, I'm one of those people that would never buy a piece of anything for support. I know a few people that just love things because they've got good support. Well, I appreciate having good support. Like at Astrophysics, I love calling them when I do need support, and I'll call them and use their support. I don't mind that. But what I really love Astrophysics for is I don't need no support most of the time. I mean, everything just works. And PixInsight, I'm sorry, there are a lot of resources, but they aren't necessarily PixInsight resources or understandable, if you know what I mean. There are, however, ways to bowl through that, get through it to where you can start learning it. And once you get over that first hump learning curve, you can get an awful lot really quickly. So
yeah, thanks for correcting me, Alex. I didn't mean to say support from PixInsight. I meant support from the community.
oh, okay, yeah, and believe me, I wasn't trying to correct you. I was just trying to say, you know, PixInsight's got a long way to go. So I mean, anybody want an advertisement? Warren's putting on a couple of workshops. He's just putting on one in Buffalo. I think he told us about that. He's got two scheduled, one for Tucson. Was it September 21st and 22nd, 23rd? He's got another one scheduled coming up for Southern California at the Hugh-Tech place. So anybody wants to go in Orange County, they've got the same program going. And those kinds of things are really wonderful, but they're $600 away after you've already bought a $300 piece of software. And they really do work. Okay, so you know, to think about that, if you want to know more about it, you can see Warren's website. But I still, having said all the disparaging things I just said about PixInsight as far as their support, yes, you do have to do that eventually. There are ways to get all this astroimaging done without PixInsight, but they aren't as efficient once you've learned how to use them.
and PixInsight can be really complex. It could be really powerful. But Alex had done a session here, a loaf of bread, a jug of milk, and PixInsight, which basically simplifies it and does something that most PixInsight users aren't necessarily looking to do. Just break it down into a few simple steps, not getting 100% out of your images and doing everything you possibly can, throwing the kitchen sink at it. Not that. Just doing the basics and getting a really nice image out of it. Letting PixInsight's calibration routine do all the work, which it does really well. Basically, calibration and stacking. It does that really, really well. That was the first thing I noticed coming from Deep Sky Stacker. Even though I had no idea what I was doing in PixInsight, files that spit out of calibration just looked a lot better than what I was getting out of Deep Sky Stacker. So don't try too much when you start off with it. I see we've hit that hour mark. One more, I will definitely repeat this. lightvortexastronomy.com is a great place to look if you're starting in PixInsight because he has a number of tutorials that really help out. Doing various things, but whether it's narrowband combination. Actually, there's a lot of good stuff on there.
And one other thing I want to say is, guys, you've just spent $3 to $5 to $8 to whatever $1,000 on stuff with wires and cables and glass and stuff like that. You really can't afford $300 on a piece of software. You wouldn't buy a big fancy car and not, you know, buy gas for it, would you?
All right. Well, hopefully we all got to reminisce about what got us into astrophotography and or astronomy. I don't specifically have a session planned for next week. I've got to try and again come up with something midweek. We have an idea of someone we're going to hit up for it, but we will see. Thank you all for coming. Thanks to everyone in the room for helping to keep the conversation going. Thanks to everyone in chat for basically just chatting. We will see you all next week. Like I said, as always, feel free to post your images of the week. Feel free to reach out with me, whether it's to me, whether it's a question or whether it's an idea for a presentation, or if you'd like to be a presenter, whatever it may be. Thanks again, guys. Have a good night. We'll see you next week.